let's put it this way. Like God designed creation so that for every bad bug, there's 1,000 good ones. That's like literally the ratio. And so we spend so much time battling the bad guys at the expense of all the good guys. And so if we can do things in our home garden that favor the beneficial organisms, the beneficial insects, we get a much more balanced system. Like God knew what he was doing when he designed creation.
Mhm.
Um, we just have to work with it.
Welcome to The Home and the Maker, sharing advice and encouragement about all topics homemaking and homesteading, and honoring the maker in all of it. Join Megan from Shine.fm for today's conversation.
Welcome to this episode of the Home and the Maker podcast. I have with me Dan and Julie Perkins. They run Perkins Good Earth Farm in DeMotte, Indiana, which is a certified organic farm that operates through CSA Shares, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture. So basically, members pay for their shares and receive produce every week in return. And Perkins Good Earth Farm also has a store and a kitchen, and they've created a community around educating other they're basically their farm members on how to work with veggies and cook with them too. And looking at their website, I feel like I'm only scratching the surface of all that they have available. But welcome, Dan and Julie.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great to be here.
So tell me, with it being wintertime, what are some things that the average home gardener can do to get their garden ready for spring? I mean, what are you doing on the farm? What can the average home gardener do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Our approach is really to care for the soil, which really just comes right out of scripture and caring for creation. And like a garden is a great way to do that. And we do that by putting the garden to rest by keeping it covered with something, because your garden soil is alive. There's literally more organisms in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the face of the earth. So like, you got to think about, okay, how am I going to provide housing and food and all that for my garden critters, the invisible things. And so real practically, that's, you can take leaves, grass clippings as you clean up your yard and just lay a nice 3 to 4 inch layer on top of your garden.
Awesome. So in the winter, what seeds are you starting indoors? What just can be planted straight in the garden in the spring? Like as you're planning, what are you kind of getting ready to start in the winter?
Yeah, that's a great question. This time of year, we're planting garlic actually next week. It
Okay.
is a kind of like a tulip where you plant it in the fall and then it comes up in the spring. And that's a great way to kind of get a crop in this time of year. You can also, you're not really starting any plants yet. If you'd like to grow onions from seed, you'd start those in February. And besides that, you're just kind of putting things to rest unless you have like a high tunnel or some sort of greenhouse to protect stuff. Then you have to plant, you can grow stuff all winter, but you have to have it to full size by November 10th.
Okay.
That is the winter equinox where daylight drops below 10 hours. All growth basically stops. It might be warm enough to grow, but you don't have enough day length.
Gotcha. So when it comes to like February, March, what kinds of things, like do you start anything inside or are you just straight planting in the garden?
Yeah, we grow most of our things from transplant. And that's a great way to get a jump on the season, get a jump on pests. And so those things would be like onions, things that grow really slow and take a long time, leeks in February. Then when you get into March, you could start like lettuce heads, spring broccolis, cauliflower, cabbages. And then once you get into April, that's when you start your tomatoes and peppers. They grow really fast, and you don't want them to get too big.
Gotcha. So I saw on your website that you offer compost. So I've been reading a book on compost, but for the average home gardener, what is the best method?
So the best method for compost is really to make sure you actually, if you're going to buy it, there's two ways. You can make it yourself. And the easiest way is to have 50% brown material, 50% green. You mix those together, water it, and you let it cook. And if you can turn it, 3 or 4 times, monitor it for temperature, you can get a really good product within 2 to 3 months. This is not during the dead of winter.
Yeah.
So really right now you're just kind of putting your compost piles to bed and letting them sit. But during the main season, you can really crank out stuff. Also, if you're going to buy compost, you got to make sure that it isn't just a pile that someone lets sit with horse manure in it, because that is the worst thing you can do from a weed perspective, because that manure, that compost, if it's not, doesn't reach 130 degrees or more for 4 or 5 days straight, which any sort of compost, if you're not managing it, will not, and you'll have weed seed, and you will be basically sowing 1 million weed seeds in your garden.
Don't want that.
Yes.
So when you're planning the garden for the spring or for your farm, are you thinking at all about rotating crops? Are you thinking about, do you plant stuff in the same place? Like, are you kind of zoning, mapping out where things go?
Yeah, and the winter is a really great time to do that. I say we do all our planning and thinking in the winter, and then we just execute. So having a week by week plan is really excellent to do beforehand, because then in the busyness of life, you don't have to think, well, where was I going to put those peppers? Where was I going to put those lettuces? And yeah, we do practice crop rotation as a certified organic operation, and we use lots of compost to provide for our fertility. It's known as, like, if you want to YouTube like deep compost no-till gardening, you'll kind of get all sorts of some good stuff, but some kind of crazy stuff. But like No-Till Growers is a great YouTube channel with Jesse Frost. That's got some great it's for market gardeners, like those that sell even at a hobby scale, but the principles all apply to the garden scale.
Gotcha. So basically you're practicing crop rotation. What things shouldn't be planted? Like, I've read that potatoes shouldn't be planted in the same place every year.
Yeah, ideally they shouldn't be like this. Vegetables in the same plant family, like so potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant are all in Solanaceae. So it's not a good idea to plant them in the same spot year after year. Now, the home gardener, limited by space, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And so that's where, if you are properly amending your soil with compost, putting the mulch on like this time of year, or using cover crops, that's another thing we didn't talk about. You can, let's put it this way, like God designed creation so that for every bad bug, there's 1,000 good ones. That's like literally the ratio. And so we spend so much time battling the bad guys at the expense of all the good guys. And so if we can do things in our home garden that favor the beneficial organisms, the beneficial insects, we get a much more balanced system. Like, God knew what he was doing when he designed creation. We just have to work with it. And so having like wild areas where beneficial insects can live, like not mowing everything, like if you live on 2 or 3 acres, mowing everything, that's an ecological desert. There's basically no living organisms per se that are going to benefit your garden if you do that. So, get crazy, have some wild areas with native flowers, that kind of stuff. They really are profoundly beneficial.
That's awesome. My husband looks forward to that someday.
Nice.
So what was my next question going to be? Oh, so organic farming, not using chemicals and other bad things. So for the home gardener, what are some easy practices to maybe either prevent the pests or diseases, I guess?
Yeah. So like when I say organic or regenerative, gardening or farming, it's really about focusing on not necessarily just what we can't do, but what we can do, right? So, using good compost, keeping your soils alive and healthy by protecting them. And so a couple key techniques, and this will sound kind of crazy, is get rid of your rototiller. Like, your soil is a living organism. And so if you go in there and chop everything up, that sets your garden back down to zero in terms of like beneficial insects and organisms that we can't see that are there. It basically destroys everything. We do it to control weeds. So the question becomes, how do you control weeds without a rototiller? Well, using compost that's weed-free, keeping your ground covered prevents those weeds from ever having to germinate. Weeds are like God's Band-Aid. And so if you keep your soil protected, those weeds largely won't be there. And so when you do that, you're able to then create kind of back to that balanced system where there's good, bad, and bad bugs. It's just like there's bad bugs all around us, and some people get sick, some people don't. It's kind of how you care for yourself or you care for the soil, right?
Yeah.
And then there are some like techniques. So cabbage moth is a very common pest that eats people's broccoli, cabbage. Like most people don't try to even grow it because they just get so gross with the cabbage worm poo. It's just really gross. A simple technique, instead of using a spray, is to take what's called like floating row cover. It almost looks like a bed sheet. And you just cover your plants when you put them out in the garden, and you keep them covered as long as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then the insect can't get to your broccoli. So there's a lot of techniques you can use that are just preventing the insect from getting there.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. Now, Julie, you do a lot with the CSA aspect of your farm. So I love that on your website, you talk about the practices for your farm. So tell me about the first one. And I love this, that the first thing is family. So how does that play out with your farm?
Sure. So Dan and I have 4 children, and we want them to be involved on the farm, but not feel like they have been forced to be involved on the farm. And so they have all, like, since they were little, been, when they're real little, they like to harvest potatoes, and you just kind of keep growing the skills. So I guess one part is, teaching them how to work, making sure they get paid and they get to work with their friends and build relationships that way. But the other part is for Dan and me to have balance, so that at this point, we try and end our work day. Mine ends earlier when the kids come home from school, but Dan tries to be done between 5 and 6 so that we can have dinner together. Or if there's a sport event, we can do that. And so I guess saying enough, like what is enough, and not always trying to add. So we're working all the time. But yeah, making family a priority. We knew that we wanted that from the beginning. And the other part of that is both sets of our parents actually help us a lot too. Mm-hmm. They pick up the kids from places, bring them to appointments, they do deliveries.
They're like our taxi service for after school activities, which is wonderful.
Yeah. So I would say both our children and our parents are really involved, and we really love that.
That's awesome. Now, share with me about the CSA aspect, because I didn't know much about that before just reading your website, but I love that it's an option for people who may think that organic has to cost more. So tell me about people's response to kind of what this is, and, oh, this doesn't have to cost so much.
Yeah. I learned about the CSA from Dan, who worked on one out in Massachusetts. Completely foreign concept to me. But when I visited him there and saw it in action, I thought, this is amazing. And I do think this could work in DeMotte, where I grew up. And what we have found that people really love about it is, yes, the quality of the veggies, but also, you get to know each other. You come each week, you see people, you get to know new people. You see people you maybe didn't even know were a CSA member. You connect, you're on the farm, not only picking your veggies, but going out into those wild areas, picking your own. And I think as far as cost goes, we have always gone in with the mentality of, we need to make enough money to pay ourselves and our employees, and
a living
wage. But we also know that a lot of CSAs are geared for upper income. And so we copied another farm who has a sliding scale. So we offer different income levels based on your season of life. And we have the rationale for that on our website. And then the other thing is we do not pack boxes. Everything is laid out. So we remove the packaging cost. And so in a sense, we have 175 members in our CSA, and we consider that like a wholesale client. So it's in crates. People come, they ideally bring their own bags. They walk the line, they get their veggies.
So they still get a lot of choice. If you don't like kohlrabi and fennel, some of the weird vegetables, like you don't have to take them.
Right.
And then you don't also have to go online and order specifically your box. You're just kind of showing up and eating what's in season and being held accountable, right? Like accountability is a word that kind of comes up why people join.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the CSA is like the kind of the core of what we do, and we've added everything after that. And we've just been thrilled with, I mean, now we have like, we're feeding our original CSA members' grandkids, which is just really cool.
Yeah, that is profoundly rewarding where it's like, oh yeah, you grew up eating our vegetables. And now here's your little one, first time pulling a carrot out of the ground and like eating it with soil still on it, and they're like, or spinach, and the kid is like, oh, my kids never eat spinach, but then they like your spinach. Like there's something profound about that.
That's amazing. I love that. So in your online education piece of this, for the members of the CSA, what kinds of things are you educating? Basically, is it basically just recipes and what to do with like storing the veggies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is the basics for sure. We offer storage information and eating guides for each of the seasons, but then we have a certified kitchen like in the store. And so during CSA time, we have samples of different foods out. We make our own soups and salads and jams and different things that we have for sale, but we always give the recipe. Almost always. I maybe have to do a little catch up this winter, but we're constantly experimenting too. And, if we're short on, one time we were short on cabbage, so we used watermelon radish to make a coleslaw, and we were like, this is amazing. So we put ourselves in the shoes of our CSA members in that it's like, well, if we're going to give you fennel, well, what are we going to do with fennel? And so we have that in our egg salad. We have that in one of our juices, just that idea of we're using all these same veggies. And so if I'm stuck on a veggie, surely my members are, well, not surely, I have more experienced cooks in the group than I am. But that's the other part, is we do have a private CSA Facebook group where people share recipes and ideas. And even I, throw out questions sometimes. I know that there are people who know more than I do. And so we're all sharing and benefiting that way.
I love that. That is so awesome. So big picture, whether it's just big picture organic farming and gardening or just big picture of your farm, how have you both seen God at work just in your farm or in the process of gardening?
That's a really good question. I see it every day. We have 12 employees and we have, we feed like 1,000 people a week. And so we just see people's lives changed, like their lives improve because of the food they eat. And the people we employ, they get joy and satisfaction from the jobs they're doing. And that's really rewarding to see that we can be a part of that and being passionate about putting good, clean food in our bodies so that we can do God's work, whatever that might be, for our customers, whatever jobs they have.
Yeah, for sure. Echoing everything Dan said. And then I like two specific ways that are kind of different from each other come to mind. Just walking the fields and seeing the vegetables. Like we know how easily a crop can be lost. And so every time we have a good crop, it's just gratitude. Thank you, Lord. Like we're doing our part, but we know this wouldn't happen without the systems you've created. And then the other part is, farming can be stressful. We were not business majors, but you're starting your own business. And so we've learned a lot about how the money part works and cash flow. And there have been some stressful times for sure. And the Lord always comes through in ways that are expected and unexpected. So just very grateful. It is stressful, but it is pretty fun to live in a like daily dependence. Like, okay, Lord, you're going to provide. We're going to do our work, but we're going to trust you for the things out of our control.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I forget because I'm dreaming for the homestead someday, but
Yes.
I forget about the fact that sometimes things do not go as planned.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of have to live with that open-handed mentality. So I'm glad that you touched on that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it so much. Your wisdom, all the things you had to share about your farm. And man, I got to come visit it.
For sure. We would love that.
We have 2 Airbnb stays on our property because hospitality is kind of one of our things we're growing into, and like sharing this place and its beauty with others, the weary traveler, so to speak, is just something we love doing. So you could come and stay.
There we go. I was like, I'm pretty sure I looked it up on the map and I'm like, I feel like my parents' house is like right down the road. So
yeah, probably.
super, super close to where I grew up. So, but thank you guys so much for your time. If you want to learn more about what Dan and Julie are doing through their farm, you can visit PerkinsGoodEarthFarm.com. But thank you so much for listening to the podcast today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Home and the Maker podcast. And for other podcasts from Shine.fm, visit the Shine.fm podcast channel.